Have you ever looked up at a full moon and felt something creep up your spine? Not your usual fear of the dark, but a deeper sensation, as if the darkness had eyes, as if it were waiting, ready to peer back. They say that on certain nights, when the moonlight is strong enough to cut through the sky, ancient creatures walk among us, their faces disguised during the day. But at night, well, at night, they are something else. Today, we will walk down a dimly lit road together to hear two chilling stories about werewolves. These creatures that blend the horror of the supernatural with the most primal aspects of our own existence. Be warned, not everything is as it seems, and perhaps what you think is just a legend is closer than you think. The facts narrated here are experiences lived by the people who sent us the story. It is not up to us at the channel to say whether the facts are real or fiction. The story was told by Antonio, a man from São Leopoldo, Rio Grande do Sul. Hello, everyone. I would like to share with you the experience I had with a nocturnal creature, an experience that happened to me in 1994 in the city of São Leopoldo, Rio Grande do Sul, more precisely in the Campesto neighborhood, on the old avenue known today as Avenida João de Cesaro. But first of all, I would like to make it clear that I was a very skeptical person when it came to the subject of the supernatural. I believed that 99% of the stories were legends and the rest were still unexplained. Well, let's get to the story. At the time, I lived right under the high-tension wires of the electricity towers. It was an area of squatters, and the little houses were made of wood with the bathrooms built outside the houses. It was the year of the World Cup, and this happened right after the World Championship had ended. Everything was going normally, and the days went by until a rumor spread that people were seeing a strange creature in the neighborhood, or where it lived. One night, I don't remember the time, a commotion started with the dogs on the street. I didn't pay much attention to it because I imagined it was because of some animal they were chasing, or even a bitch in heat. Soon, people started talking about people seeing a creature that looked like a big black dog, which appeared when they got home from work at night, walking around. A neighbor named Joaquim, who was a retired sergeant, said he would put an end to the creature if he had the opportunity to come face to face with it. But since I was skeptical, I didn't pay any attention to this type of talk. Until one morning, I woke up feeling sick and had to use the bathroom. Since I had already said that it was in our backyard, when I finished using it, I cleaned up and started heading back towards the house. From that moment on, my nightmare began. I started hearing a gallop, similar to that of a colt running down the street that wasn't paved, and the dogs were running after it, wanting to catch what was running. Our land was completely fenced with slats, and I noticed that our gate was half open. I decided to open it to satisfy my curiosity and see what was running away from the dogs. I thought it was a colt, but halfway through, I saw what it really was. I got goosebumps all over my body. It wasn't what I had imagined. It was a male werewolf, and he was running from the dogs with a wide berth, heading towards the gate of the house. I imagined that he wanted to enter our yard to hide or escape from the dogs, so I walked to the gate without making any noise, so as not to attract attention and to be able to close it without being seen. I was walking, and the werewolf was running. My goodness! We arrived together, and the creature stopped with his face on top of me, standing only 20 centimeters away from my face, leaving us face to face. Then, at the same moment, he jumped to the side, gaining some distance from me. In the second jump, he effortlessly climbed over my neighbor's fence and entered through an opening that was under the roof of his house. Being there in the dark, the fright was so great that I couldn't scream or run. I was left without reacting, but with a mixture of fear and admiration so intense that I couldn't leave the place to go back home. I stayed there for a few minutes until I got out of the way and tried to walk back, but I couldn't. I went inside and decided to sit on the porch, looking at the neighbor's house where the creature had entered, to see if it would come out again. And nothing. What I found curious was where the werewolf had come in. The house belonged to Mr. Joaquim, the retired sergeant, who had said he would put an end to the creature if he came face to face with it. So the hours passed, and the night went on. My curiosity was greater than my fear. I stayed to see what would happen, but soon it was dawn. The sun rose, and the werewolf hadn't come out, nor had the person it had transformed into. My curiosity was still too great. I got up and went to the fence. I took a board from the edge of our yard and went into the neighbor's. When I looked through where the werewolf had come in, there was nothing inside. It had disappeared. I don't know how, but it had disappeared. Then I realized that I might be in the werewolf's own house and that Mr. Joaquim was the creature. He had said that he would shoot the creature just to cover up his sinister secret. My curiosity was even greater. Now I wanted to look Mr. Joaquim directly in the eyes to see if there was any similarity between his eyes and those of the creature. But when I got close to the house, I noticed through the window that Mr. Joaquim went into the room and then left, went into another, and never appeared again. I couldn't see his eyes, but everything indicated that he was the werewolf himself. I no longer live in the area, but I recently found a former resident on a social network who still lives there. I asked about Joaquim and learned that he died in a tragic and strange way. He told me that Joaquim was inside the house, more specifically in the kitchen, and out of nowhere he started saying things out loud in a strange and incoherent language. Some neighbors heard him scream, and then he died under the wood-burning stove, which was lit. It was a cast-iron stove of the calendar type, which fell on top of him. His wife and daughter were unable to remove the stove because of its weight and the extreme heat. They began screaming in the yard, asking for help. Some neighbors came out to help and managed to remove the stove from him, but it was too late. He was dead. I was very impressed by the story, because I remember that Joaquim was a big, strong man, and yet he got under the wood-burning stove, which was low. Unfortunately, I do not know if the creature continued to appear after his death, because I did not want to ask the resident who told me about his death. But, as we know, there are people who pray to become these creatures, and Joaquim was one of those people. On the night of his death, he said a prayer to become a werewolf. When the transformation began, he began to struggle in pain from the metamorphosis, and this caused the stove to fall on top of him, crushing and burning him. This is my experience with a creature that I imagined existed only in tales and stories. Hello, my name is Francisco, and what I'm going to tell you happened in my family in 1987 in the municipality of Cocopava. My grandmother always told us this story. My Uncle Washington doesn't like to remember what happened to him, because his disbelief and lack of respect for the supernatural almost caused a tragedy. My grandmother Severina told me that, at the time, there was a homeless woman who, on nights with a full moon, would transform into a terrifying creature and wander with her cigar along the old road of Cocopava, near the Presidente Dutra Highway. She said that this homeless woman was always asking the locals for a plate of food or something to satisfy her hunger. Since my grandmother was religious and kind, she always gave this woman something to eat. Right there, at the gate, she would sit down, eat, thank us, and go on her way, disappearing down the road. My uncle always asked her why she did this, feeding a person who wanted nothing from life and who was always begging for food at the expense of others. She turned around and told my Uncle Washington, with a determined look, that one should always do good and satisfy the hunger of those in need, no matter who they are, because a plate of food and water should never be denied to anyone. My mother, taking advantage of the situation, asked if it was really true that people could turn into werewolves on nights with a full moon. My grandmother said yes, and that all she had to do was hear the dogs being restless at night for the beast to appear. She would hear a large, strong dog running past, with the dogs following behind. My Uncle Washington, in disbelief, said that this did not exist, that it was a story to scare the children, and that if it were true, he was man enough to face such a beast head-on. My grandmother Severina once again reprimanded him, telling him to respect what he did not understand. So, the days passed, and everything calmed down. Soon that homeless woman appeared again at the gate, asking for food. My grandmother, as always, did not refuse to give it to her. Unbeknownst to me, my uncle came up behind my grandmother and said, "Feeding that idle woman again?" My grandmother scolded him in front of the woman, who paid no attention to what he had said. The woman ate, thanked him, and left. My uncle, furious at this, questioned her, "Doesn't she have a mouth to talk back like a person? Or, do you have a mangy dog? Well, is that what they say you are?" The woman immediately stopped turned around, looked at him, and said, "Be careful, young man." She turned and left. My grandmother felt a shiver down her spine, and my uncle was speechless because when she said those words, her eyes apparently changed color, turning a vibrant yellow. After that, the woman left, and there was no sign of her again. My grandmother thought it was strange, because she never disappeared for more than 2 or 3 days. It had been 2 weeks since the woman had come to ask for something to eat. My uncle said that she had recovered and was looking for another place or people to give her free food. My grandmother scolded him again and told him to be quiet. 2 days later, my uncle received a visit from a friend who invited him to go to a dance at a farm, and he immediately accepted. When the date of the dance arrived, my uncle got ready and waited for his friend at home. My grandmother began to have bad feelings and, together with my mother, insisted that he not go, saying that something was telling him not to go. But my uncle, stubborn, said that he would go anyway, that he had nothing to worry about, that nothing bad would happen, and that he was already old enough to defend himself. Then his friend arrived and called him. He greeted my grandmother and mother, and then they said goodbye, heading to the dance. My grandmother told them to be alert when they returned, because it was a full moon and usually reveals what is hidden in the darkness. Uncle Washington said that was nonsense, that they were just stories. They continued on their way. As they walked, they talked about what they really wanted to do, have fun and meet some girls who were in the pastures. My uncle saw the full moon rising on the horizon. At that moment, he said he felt a shiver run through his entire body, as if something was watching him in the middle of the forest. But he soon thought it was all in his head. He kept walking, and soon they arrived at the party. They greeted their acquaintances and had drinks. When a certain time came, around 1 a.m., my uncle told his friend that he was leaving. Since Lucas was leaving, he said he would stay a little longer. My uncle told his friend not to worry because he knew how to take care of himself. So he said goodbye and went back home. Since the moon was full and gave him good light, he walked without worrying, but at a certain point on the path, he started to feel those shivers again, with the same feeling of being watched in the darkness. So he decided to walk faster for a certain part of the path. He heard something fall behind him, and when he turned around, he saw what looked like a half-eaten animal. At the time, he thought that some other animal had carelessly passed by him and dropped its prey. He looked from side to side, but saw nothing because both parts of the road were surrounded by cattle pastures with short grass. He saw nothing. That was when he heard a growl right behind him, another growl. When he turned around, he saw a huge creature standing, staring at him right in the middle of the road, with its yellow eyes reflecting the moonlight. At that exact moment, he remembered the woman who lived on the street because that animal had a human appearance with feminine features. My uncle noticed what seemed to be a slight smile of satisfaction on the creature's face. It immediately advanced towards him. In an act of desperation, he threw himself to the side, falling on the rocks, which caused some minor injuries. Taking advantage of the fact that he was on the ground, he tried to pick up a large rock and held it in his hands. The creature seemed to be enjoying the whole situation. He told me that the beast was sitting on its hind legs, staring at him, growling and showing its teeth. My uncle, then, in an excess of fury, shouted with the stone in his hand, "Come on, you wretch. If I'm going to die, I'll die fighting, but I'll also hurt you so that you'll remember me in human form." At that moment, he stood up and howled loudly. He went after him. The creature tried to bite his arm, but he dodged, managing to stop it and, taking advantage of the opportunity, hit the animal directly in the head with the stone, leaving it stunned and even more angry. He came out again with all his strength, throwing it away, making it hit its head on the ground and leaving both of them dizzy. He saw the creature coming towards him very slowly, showing its teeth with that evil look before fainting. My uncle began to hear a car honking in the distance, coming quickly towards him. Then my Uncle Washington woke up 3 days later in the hospital with my grandmother and mother by his side. When he was discharged, his friend Lucas, who had accompanied him to the party, came to visit him. He asked how he had heard about what had happened. His friend replied that a neighbor had offered him a ride home. Since the girl Lucas was interested in had also left, he decided to accept, as he didn't want to be on the road in those early hours of the morning. Some distance down the road, Old Matthias could see a large brown dog on top of something, and when they realized it was a person, they started honking. The dog looked in the direction of the car, ran off, jumped the barbed wire fence, and disappeared into the darkness. Matthias and his wife, Kira, put him in the car and took him to the hospital. They said that the animal was the cursed woman who lived on the street and that she had found someone to hurt in the form of a beast. I was surprised because I didn't believe it until I saw it with my own eyes. When we got to a safe place, we realized that it was you. We immediately put you in the car and took you to the city hospital, where you remained unconscious for 3 days. Afterwards, I told my uncle that now he knew what had happened to him. Sometime later, my uncle was returning from the city, and at a certain point on the road, he found the woman sitting under the bamboo grove. He saw her get up and walk over to him, saying, "You were lucky, but out of respect for your mother, who never refused to feed me, I didn't hurt you. It was just a scare and a warning to respect what you don't know." At the same time, she turned and walked off the road until she was out of sight. That day, my uncle no longer doubted things and began to respect what he didn't know. For a while, the wolf kept appearing, and some residents heard a creature running down the road late at night, with dogs chasing it. But after everything that happened, the woman never asked for anything again. My grandmother and my uncle are now 60 years old, and he always says that everything he told them is true. These stories remind us of something that is both fascinating and terrifying. There are mysteries that we prefer to leave in the shadows. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of wisdom. Because if we decide to look beyond the veil of normality, what we find may be more real than we are prepared to face. So the next time you hear dogs howling in the night, think twice before you go out to see what's out there. You might not like what you find,